Okay, so apparently I didn't give you enough news last week, so right before Christmas, here is yet another episode of the Linux and open source news. And this week we've got some interesting stuff. First, we've got SteamOS devices pretty much confirmed coming from Lenovo at first, and that's pretty interesting. We also have the EU launching an investigation into TikTok, as the US is already preparing to ban it. The EU might be next. And we also have Mozilla's State of the Union, basically that they do each year, and their renewed focus, this time, you guessed it, on AI and ads. So we'll talk about all of this, but also a lot more in this episode, including our sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. You probably know them by now if you're a regular viewer of the channel. They provide a full suite of solutions to ensure that your Linux fleet stays as secure and up to date as possible while reducing downtime to a minimum. This includes rebootless patching solutions, which apply fixes to critical pieces of your Linux environment, like the kernel, shared libraries, and virtualization systems, all without needing to reboot your systems or to cause any disruptions. TuxCare also offers extended support for end-of-life distros, languages, and frameworks like Spring. And this week, they're bringing you some new information about their partner program. That's an initiative that lets companies redistribute and sell TuxCare's solutions, potentially at a discount. They can also benefit from joint public relations or even enter into exclusive sponsorship deals. They've partnered with several innovative companies across the globe already, and your organization could probably benefit from teaming up with them as well. If you work for or if you run a company that provides services to enterprise Linux customers, TuxCare's partner program is a good opportunity to grow with them by offering your customers their rebootless patching services or their extended lifecycle support. It's a great way to improve your organization's own offerings or just to give your customers something new so they can focus on Linux and enterprise-grade security. Click the link in the description to know more about the TuxCare partner program. Okay, so let's begin with the SteamOS devices. There are big chances that we'll see some SteamOS-powered devices very soon, as we all expected, because Valve said that they wanted to do that anyway. The first one might be the Lenovo Legion Go S, because it could come in two versions, one powered by Windows and one powered by SteamOS. Leaks showed that device in black and white, and the black version has a Steam logo next to one of the buttons, as in, this button is the Steam button, while the white version of the same device did not have that same logo on the same button. Of course, it might also just mean that that Steam button opens Steam inside of Windows, but since Lenovo isn't specifically affiliated with Valve, it would be surprising, and not all versions would thus have the same buttons, which also would be pretty weird. On top of that, Lenovo announced that Valve and Lenovo will be partnering at CES 2025. Pierre-Loup Griffet, which you probably know for his work on Proton, on SteamOS, and also being the co-designer of the Steam Deck, they'll be here at Lenovo's booth at CES 2025. If you combine that with the recent leaks with that Steam button, and the recent powered by SteamOS branding guidelines, I think it becomes clear that this specific Lenovo device will run SteamOS in one of its configurations, and it will be the very first device not made by Valve that is sold with this operating system, which is huge news for Linux gaming. Lenovo doesn't really have to take much risk here. They can just produce a minimal inventory of the SteamOS version, and if it doesn't sell, they still have the Windows version, and if it sells well, they can always produce more. So they just have to not overestimate the demand for the SteamOS model. For Valve, it means a lot more potential new customers buying hardware that maybe they were interested in but the Steam Deck couldn't provide, so that's pretty cool. And for Linux gaming, well, the more users we have, the more developers will take us seriously, the more they will focus on porting their games to Linux, or at the very least, testing them with Proton, making sure they run well on SteamOS, fixing the anti-cheat problems, and all the things like that. So it's really cool news, And it might also give Valve an opportunity to start testing how well they can handle the demands of a hardware partner in terms of support, in terms of updates, in terms of firmware updates, and the interactions with one company like that, so they can in the future expand this partnership to other devices. Now, the EU is next in launching an investigation into TikTok. Since the elections in Romania, one of the member countries in the EU, there have been big suspicions of electoral interference that led to a pro-Russian candidate winning access to the second turn of this election, something no one really expected because this candidate polled in the single digits but managed to get, I think, 22% of the popular vote. This election was overturned by the Romanian highest court, meaning the election will be redone entirely because the entire process was so suspicious. Apparently, this candidate was heavily promoted throughout TikTok with recommendations by the algorithm of content promoting him, paid promotion, and other political accounts. And that candidate specifically declared spending zero funds on his promotion, which really seems to point out to someone else spending a lot of money to get him elected. There were also apparently a lot of cyber attacks conducted while the election was going on. I think they reported 85,000 cyber attacks, and there were also login data for the official Romanian election website published on Russian cybercrimes platforms, meaning chances are some votes might have been fraudulent or might not have been counted properly. It's pretty weird. Now, what's the link with TikTok exactly? Well, the EU wants to look into political advertisements on TikTok and whether they respected the legislation for this electoral process. TikTok said that they will collaborate fully, that they don't accept political ads, and that they police misinformation and hate speech, which, if you've ever used TikTok, is not true at all, because you can find the most heinous stuff in there in mere seconds. Now, in the end, it is just an investigation in the EU. It's not like the US passing a law to completely ban TikTok if they don't sell to a US company. Here, it's just an investigation, but if it notices some weird stuff and that TikTok has been lying or not conducting properly or not respecting the law, it might end up being banned or having severe sanctions applied to it. So it's gonna be interesting to follow what happens to this thing. Now, Mozilla published their annual State of Mozilla report, in which they detailed the state of their finances for 2023, which, yeah, I know is very weird because we're at the end of 2024, but their report talks about 2023. It looks like Mozilla did earn a lot more money in 2023, about 60 million USD more, due to interests and dividends. So basically, they made more money by acting like an investment bank and a venture capitalist firm, which is kind of weird, but kind of fun. Their Google money and revenue from other search engine deals dropped by about $15 million, and they also dropped $9 million in revenue from their own products like Pocket, ads, sponsored links, and other things. The search deals still represent $495 million, so 3/4 of the entire revenue. And expenses at Mozilla reached $496 million, which is $70 million more than the previous year, apparently mostly spent on software development, branding, and admin costs. And if you're thinking it's just to pay the very high salary of Mozilla's employees, not necessarily. Mozilla is a non-profit, meaning it needs to spend that money. It can't bank it and have a large cash reserve. It needs to spend it in various things. So they're spending it on actual development and other things. Now, whether this money is well spent is another question entirely, but it doesn't mean they're taking all the money and stuffing the executives' pockets with it. Mozilla also issued a few statements on where the money is coming from and what they will do in what they call the AI era. And, well, Mozilla added 2 new organizations to their entire portfolio of subsidiaries. They have a venture firm that will fund startups building AI products aligned with Mozilla's values, and they have their own startup that aims to help open source AI reach a larger audience of developers. Mozilla Ventures has apparently already invested in 45 startups. Mozilla also confirmed that they need to diversify their revenue sources and that they're exploring, I quote, privacy-respecting advertising technology, end quote, in line with the various moves that they've made in 2024. They're basically trying to show you relevant ads without giving your user data to advertisers, which is something that we need if the free-of-charge internet model is to survive, because without ads, it's not going to survive, but also it can't keep going as it is with no respect for user privacy. And I can't say I like this new direction towards AI and ads, but also I see why we need it. First, AI. We need to make sure that if this thing is not a fad like Web3 or cryptocurrency is, we have open source modules, we have companies that do this ethically, and right now, there are very few that do so. And as per ads, the free-of-charge internet model cannot survive without ads. It's just a fact, it doesn't work. If you want free content, free websites, free blogs, free videos, you need to have ads. But also current ads, there are way too many, they're way too long, way too intrusive, and they just depend on your personal data, and that's just not acceptable. So, if Mozilla is the organization that aims to solve all of this, cool, but it does mean that they have to associate themselves with domains that people who really backed Mozilla from the start kinda don't like. Now this week, XFCE 4.20 was released. It's the result of 2 years of work, but don't expect something as big as a GNOME release or a KDE release, because XFCE is a much smaller project with a lot less contributions. The main improvement is, as you could have guessed, in 2024, the experimental Wayland session. They say it's very experimental, it's only for advanced users right now, but almost all XFCE components have been ported to Wayland, and they will of course still work with X11. They use Wayfire as their compositor for now because they couldn't develop their own in time, but XF Window Manager, their current window manager for X11, will at some point take over. Now, from the fact that they don't have their own compositor, they're missing a few features on that session, like workspaces, system tray icons for apps that don't use a recent tray icon API, keyboard and mouse settings aren't there, brightness keys and suspending using the keyboard, that's not working. Screenshots aren't fully supported yet, like rectangular screenshots and screenshots of specific windows, but this is all coming in the future. Apart from that, there are improvements to the desktop experience, of course, with the ability to use the same keyboard shortcut for multiple actions if they don't conflict with each other. The file manager improved its search feature, it has new toolbar buttons in the default toolbar, and if you have a small window and all the toolbar buttons wouldn't fit, they now moved to an overflow menu. You can use client-side decorations in the file manager as well if you want, although I'm pretty sure most XFCE users don't want that, and there are a lot of smaller changes, like being able to switch to symbolic icons in the sidebar. You can also configure the width of the panel's borders. You can show the desktop just by hovering over the Show Desktop applet. Lock screen settings were much simplified. There's better support for dark themes and icon themes, notably incomplete icon themes. They will now show a warning. Display scaling should work better. You can tweak your mouse acceleration profile between adaptive or flat, and high-resolution scrolling is now supported, provided that your mouse supports that as well. They also improved desktop icons with better settings, better positioning, and there are a lot more smaller changes all over the desktop. Now, of course, if you compare 2 years of work on XFCE to the past 4 versions of GNOME, which were also developed in 2 years, then sure, you're not gonna see the same amount of changes and improvements and refinements, but also users of XFCE probably don't want constant changes to the experience. They probably use XFCE because it's lightweight, it's simple, it's customizable, and it doesn't force one way of using a desktop onto them. I think the XFCE team did a great job here, and they now have a basis for their Wayland session, which is going to be very necessary in the 1 or 2 coming years as distros progressively switch off X11 and move to Wayland. That's happening in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10, and that's gonna happen to other distros pretty soon as well. Now, if you felt Linux systems were getting slower, more bloated, and less efficient in general as time goes on, Phoronix has an interesting benchmark, comparing Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9.5 to RHEL 10 Beta, which is obviously based on a more recent platform in terms of the Linux kernel and underlying libraries. And it turns out, over 100 benchmarks on an AMD server on the same hardware, the new beta for RHEL is about 10% faster on average, with a giant difference in encryption and decryption tasks, but also differences in Blender benchmarks, even when just using the CPU. Python benchmarks are also much faster on RHEL 10, so it does look like Linux is getting more efficient and more powerful with time, not less efficient, at least on the server side of things. As per the desktop, we'll have to see. We would have to compare older versions of GNOME to newer versions of GNOME when it comes to RHEL, or maybe older versions of KDE to newer ones. And also, since RHEL 10 will drop X11 and only use Wayland, there's gonna be that comparison to do as well. I would really like to see those kind of benchmarks, like a 5-10-year-old Linux desktop compared to one that is made today, running the same benchmarks with the same apps with the same versions, trying to see if it works. I don't know if it's super easy to do with very old desktops, because you can't really install them on modern distros, but maybe when we have that Ubuntu core desktop and we can change the latest GNOME snap with a very old GNOME snap, this comparison will be a lot easier. We'll see, could be fun. And to conclude on this episode, let's talk Linux hardware, because in the world of Linux-specific devices, there's one big manufacturer I never really had the chance of reviewing all that much, and that's System76. They just refreshed their Pangolin laptop, and this time it comes with a brand new all-aluminum body in a darker color than the usual silver, which looks really nice, kind of MacBook-like. If you've seen those previous generation, like sort of midnight dark aluminum MacBooks, it looks like that. Speakers seem to be firing up with speaker grills on each side of the keyboard. It's a 16-inch laptop, by the way. It seems to have actual clicky buttons for the touchpad, which I personally really do not like, but some people do. It has a 2K display at 120Hz, and it's using the Ryzen 8945HS CPU. The port selection isn't bad either, with one USB 4 Type-C port, one USB-C 3.2 Gen 2 port, multiple Type-A ports, a micro SD card reader, HDMI 2.0, and an audio jack. All of that for a 16-inch laptop that weighs less than 4 pounds, about 1.7 kilograms. There are no dedicated GPU options, but the laptop is $12.99 USD, which seems decent for a full aluminum MacBook Pro-like design that is repairable, has a webcam and microphone hardware kill switch, and has upgradable RAM and storage. I definitely need to talk to System76 about how I can review certain laptops and desktops. I know they're not necessarily the most EU-friendly in terms of shipping, because they just don't have warehouses in the EU. They really mostly serve the Americas, North and South, but not necessarily the EU. But I would like to compare what they do to what we have in Europe, like Slimbook and Tuxedo, which, incidentally, is this video sponsor. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux out of the box. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world, and they have a big range of devices that will cover every need and every price point, whether you need a basic laptop as a student, or a very powerful workstation, or a gaming PC, a gaming laptop, whatever in between, they have it. Plenty of choices for the hardware, for the keyboard layout, but also for your own logo engraved on the lid of your laptop. I only use their devices to run my YouTube channels, to run this show, and I only use their devices for my gaming needs as well. So if you need a new computer, you want to run Linux on it, and you want to make sure that you support a company that directly contributes to Linux, click the link in the description of this episode and go check out Tuxedo computers. They are really good. Okay, so this will be it for this video. As always, you know what to do with all the YouTube buttons. Click all of them, leave some comments, make the channel grow a little bit, because YouTube has not been kind to the Linux experiment in 2024. Anyway, happy holiday season, Merry Christmas if you celebrate that, and I guess you will see me in the next Linux news video next week. Bye!